I think crime is really going to increase if we have a dollar crisis, because you're going to have food shortages, you're going to have power blackouts, and you're going to have an absence of police. I mean, I think the police are not going to show up for work if their paychecks don't have any value. They're going to be more concerned about protecting their own families than protecting yours. So it's kind of going to be every man for himself. And yes, we're more prosperous because we don't have to do it all ourselves, but we become more dependent on other people. And if that whole thing breaks down, no, you can't fend for yourself. You know, you can't feed yourself. When you elect people, the biggest liar wins. And the ones that can lie consistently win the most. They stay in office. You don't stay in office by telling the voters the truth. You stay in office by telling them what they want to hear.
Would you consider yourself a prepper? Because I mean, I first stumbled, I think the first video of yours I watched was a video you were showing the combi bar. And, you know, I actually did a couple videos of the combi bar after that. And you were talking about how, hey, you know, this is a way to denominate gold. You know, I know you're located, I think, in Puerto Rico or something like that. Would you consider yourself a prepper, you know, beyond just the financial aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, first of all, too, we sell something at Schiff Gold called a barter bag, which is, you know, the silver that everybody should have in their home, you know, for an emergency that you could use to barter. Right, the barter bag. It's, you know, small rounds, 1 ounce silver rounds and things like that, or junk silver. And, you know, down here in Puerto Rico, I think Puerto Rico won't be that bad, because I think Puerto Ricans are so used to hardship, they may not notice the difference. I mean, they're used to power outages. I mean, this place is terrible for so many people, but, you know, the public endures it. They've kind of accepted it as a way of life, whereas Americans are expecting something better. You know, so the Puerto Ricans, you know, the bar is a lot lower here. So, you know, I think it'll be a lot better. In fact, you know, when they had all those, you know, the Black Lives Matter protests, riots, whatever you want to call them, I mean, nothing happened in Puerto Rico. They, you know, everything was kind of status quo. And they did have this big protest when they wanted to kick out a governor. And they had lots of people protesting, but it was completely civil. There was no violence. There was no looting. Nobody got hurt. And I couldn't imagine an event like that happening in a major city in the United States without that happening. So, you know, Puerto Rico might end up being a better place to be, just because of, you know, it's been so bad for so long. It's kind of an acceptable way of life. But yeah, I mean, I know if you go into my closets, we got so much stuff. I mean, I don't even have to go to the drugstore. I mean, people could shop, you know, at my house. We got so much stuff in so many closets stored in, you know, in my house in Connecticut. We've got food items. So yeah, I mean, we've, you know, we buy in bulk, you know, just because I think we might as well have it. And C, because I think, you know, the price will go up, and I think it could be rationed or scarce. So, you know, I feel better, you know. I open up, you know, my drawer with my razors, and I have 5 years worth of blades in there, and I don't even go through them that much now that I got the beard, right? I only have to shave a little bit, but I know that I'm not going to run out.
Yeah. And so where do you think, you know, if this all plays out, if and when it plays out, where do you think the best place to reside? Do you think, like, are people going to start moving out of the United States to other places? I know a lot of the techies are moving to places like New Zealand, and I don't know if that's just a fad or what that is, but
yeah, New Zealand has been a popular destination for a while. You know, they're not as much of a free market mecca as they were for a while. You know, they've got kind of that Jacinda Ardern, whatever you pronounce her name, is, you know, pretty much socialist, who's the prime minister right now, but she hasn't been able to do that much damage. But yeah, I mean, New Zealand is a beautiful country, and obviously there's a lot of land there. You know, you got more sheep than people in New Zealand. But I mean, it's pretty remote. I mean, if there's a nuclear war, I don't think anybody's going to waste a nuke on New Zealand. So you're probably pretty safe down there from all sorts of potential problems. You know, but it's kind of far from home if you want to visit your relatives, if you're coming from Canada or the US. But look, you know, I think there are parts of the US, you know, that, you know, people will go and, you know, in relative safety, depending on what the US government does, of course, with taxes and stuff, but, you know, physical safety. And, I mean, we've got a lot of fertile land in this country. There's a lot of natural resources here. But I certainly think, again, that people are going to move. I think, unfortunately, there will be a lot more opportunities outside the United States. Now, of course, I could be wrong, because if this collapse is a catalyst to cause America to reject socialism after years and years of embracing it and returning to its roots of free market capitalism, if we could kind of reset and start over and get rid of a lot of the government, get rid of a lot of the regulations and the taxes, and reignite that spirit of entrepreneurship and the rugged individual, right? If we can go back to a nation of individuals instead of this collective that we have now, there's no limit to what Americans can achieve, especially since we have a lot more technology today. I mean, look at what we did in the 19th century. Look at the incredible standard of living that we built, something that the world had never even seen until we showed it to them. But we did it with a lot less technology than we have today. So if capitalism could work in the 19th century, it can work even better in the 21st century. And as far as being on a gold standard, a 21st century gold standard would work a lot better than a 19th century gold standard with the internet, with blockchain. Yes, you can have a cryptocurrency backed by real money, backed by gold. That will work. A fiat cryptocurrency backed by nothing will not work. And that's why, Bitcoin hasn't succeeded as a unit of account or a medium of exchange. It's just served as a speculative token to gamble on because it can't fulfill a monetary function. But a cryptocurrency backed by gold can absolutely succeed and function as an alternative to a fiat currency. In fact, it is not just an alternative, it is superior in every way. And so if we go back to a gold standard, but with today's technology, it will work even better than it did in the past when we didn't have that technology to make gold even more effective as a monetary unit than it was.
So do you think that the reindustrialization of the U.S. economy, I mean, obviously that's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to come without its share of, dark days. What would be your projection for, how long a process like that might take? Because, I mean, we're talking about, a complete decoupling and a having to build new factories and having to, restart the printing press. I mean, it sounds like it would take a long time to.
Well, Rome wasn't built in a day, right?
Yeah.
But at least we're not starting from scratch. I mean, we have a good telecommunication infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Maybe our roads can use some repair. They got some potholes, but we got them, right? So we're not starting from scratch. I mean, look at what happened to Germany and Japan, how they rebuilt after the Second World War. I mean, they were bombed out. I mean, we haven't, no bombs have been dropped on our cities. So, we can come back faster. The Chinese didn't take that long once they abandoned communism to build up, the economy they have now. China was nothing in the 1980s. And so, a generation or so, and, the standard of living improved dramatically as the Chinese, became more capitalist and less socialist. So a lot of it depends on how quickly we move away from socialism, how many regulations we repeal and how fast we repeal them, how much government spending we cut, how much lower we can make taxes, because the less government we have, the quicker the economy is going to come back, because you're going to unshackle entrepreneurship. And it won't just be Americans. The whole world will want to invest in that America. We'll be a magnet for capital if we're a magnet for freedom.
Yeah, it's. I don't think the government's going to go down without a fight, unfortunately. I know here in Canada, they're starting to, put the screws in, and it appears as the harder things get, the more the heavy iron fist appears to be showing itself out of the velvet glove, so to speak.
So once government usurps power, they hold on to it. They are very reluctant to relinquish it. So it generally takes a catastrophic event. We talked about New Zealand. The reason that New Zealand became a popular destination. The reason its markets became as free as they were was because of how socialistic they were. And then they had an economic collapse in the 80s. And then the Labor Party, under a guy named Roger Douglas, came up with some tremendous free market reforms that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. And in fact, the very party that destroyed New Zealand is the one that liberated it from its own destruction. I mean, they were rolling back a lot of these socialist laws that they had passed. But it is funny too, if you go back and you look at an old encyclopedia from the 1970s, the socialists that used to write, the World Book or the Britannica, they held New Zealand up as this great example of the middle way. I mean, it was like a Sweden, right? It's great. They have all this socialism, they have all this prosperity, and see, this is why it's better than, pure capitalism. And of course, the whole experiment ended in disaster. It blew up. The country was bankrupt. But it was in that economic turmoil that was the kindling to reignite a capitalist return. And they rolled back all these laws and regulations and lowered taxes and went to a sounder monetary system. In fact, that's where the 2% inflation targeting came from. Except when New Zealand's central bank adopted 2%, it was a ceiling. It was like, we're going to make sure inflation stays below 2%. It was never a target that they wanted to achieve. They just wanted to stay below 2%, and the further below, the better. I mean, if they were at 0.5%, nobody would say, oh my God, inflation is only 0.5%, we need more. They would be great. We're 1.5% below our ceiling. Excellent. That was the whole idea. That's where it came from. Of course, then it became perverted because it went from 2% ceiling to 2% target. And now really it's 2% floor, and we're never actually going to get anywhere near that floor again. We're going to be so far above it.
It seems like this shift is only going to come with some sort of struggle. I mean, we know there's a lot of tension here in Canada too with the trucker convoy, but there's a lot of like this new populist wave. Do you foresee? I mean, I personally think that the next election in the United States could be a potential flashpoint for this clash between people who want to get the government out of the financial system and all other aspects of the system, and those who want to, potentially, move into the next phase of that whole, if you want to call it socialism or whatever. But we're seeing that, this whole IRS, armed IRS agents increasing to 80,000 to try to, milk the middle class for whatever they have left is pretty scary, when you think about it. Like it's like they're making their move almost. And, if you continue to see this militarization of the bureaucracy, we're living in scary times that we could potentially see. I don't like using the term civil war because I think it's a little sensational, but I could definitely see the tensions rising, in the coming years.
I mean, first of all, I don't even know, or I don't even think IRS agents are legally authorized to carry firearms. I think there have been certain agents of the government that have been authorized to carry firearms, and I don't think the IRS is included. So, I mean, I'm sure they're going to be armed, but it's just another thing that is in violation of law because they're not supposed to be armed. And after all, they're just collecting taxes. Why do you need to be armed, to collect taxes? Even if you think somebody is cheating on their taxes, you don't need a gun. I mean, maybe why would you need a weapon if you're, work for the government? If you're in fear for your life. So if you're dealing with crimes where the criminals are going to be armed, well, then the government agents need to be armed, right? Because, otherwise they're at risk. But if you're just going after somebody who you think cheated on their taxes, why do you need a gun? I mean, they're not going to shoot you. It's like, this is so ridiculous. So it's just the government intimidating the public, with a show of force. But also the idea that these 87,000 new IRS agents are there to get the billionaires, that's nonsense. They already have at least one, if not multiple IRS agents that is working with every billionaire in this country. There's only maybe 700 or 800 of them.
Right.
They've got those guys covered. The millionaires, they don't, at least the people that have a lot of millions, not just a house that is appraising at $1 million, but a legitimate, millionaire. I mean, they have accountants, they have lawyers, they minimize their taxes legally. They're not cheating. I mean, maybe they're cheating a little bit, but I mean, they're not going to catch them with these extra agents. These agents are going after the middle class, right? Just for the same reason that Willie Sutton robbed banks, because that's where the money is. And that's where the cheating is. The biggest tax cheats are not the rich. They don't have to cheat, right? It's the middle class. It's the self-employed. It's the guy that's got, a side hustle. It's a small business owner. They're the ones that are cheating. They can't afford the expensive lawyers and accountants. They don't qualify for all the tax breaks. The only way they can get by is to cheat. And so how do they cheat? They don't report all their income. They earn some cash, put it in their pocket, don't tell the IRS. They inflate their deductions. They claim they spent more money on business than they really did. And they don't get caught. They get away with it. And they've been doing it for years. Well, now the IRS is saying, we're coming after you, tax cheats. But it's not the rich. It's the middle class, the lower middle class. I mean, a lot of these guys that are getting paid cash, they're not rich. The billionaires and the millionaires, they're not getting paid in cash. It's the little guy who's getting paid on Venmo, or getting paid in crypto maybe, or getting paid in cash money, right? If you earn, millions or tens of millions of dollars, you're not getting that in tens and 20s, right? It's the guy that's making 5 or 10 grand on the side. That's cash, right?
Yeah, and a lot of those people too, after this pandemic, a lot of people were really hurt by the pandemic financially, and now to have, the IRS on their tail in order to make up for all of this stimulus, it's a weird twist of events.
Where they're really going to get people is they're going to go back and they're going to say, okay, you cheated on your taxes, you didn't report this, you deducted this, that you shouldn't have, like, oh, you said you made this charitable deduction. Where's your receipt? Oh, you don't have a receipt? We're disallowing that deduction, right? So a lot of stuff's going to happen. And now let's say the IRS says, okay, you owe $5,000 in back taxes. Let's add up the interest. Let's add up the late penalties, right? And now you owe $20,000. You owe $5,000 in taxes. You owe $15,000 in interest and penalties. Now what? This is going to be very difficult. A lot of small business owners could be driven out of business by the IRS. I mean, these audits can be so complicated and so time consuming that they can't even afford to operate their business and fight off the IRS. Or maybe they just submit to the shakedown and write a big check and just have to lay off a bunch of workers because that's the only way to cover the cost.
Yeah, and I think once that happens, it's going to reach a critical mass where you will start to have some sort of civil resistance, some sort of movement. All these people who've been disenfranchised are going to get together and just say, hey, enough is enough. I think it's only a matter of time before the government pushes so much. And I think they're moving into dangerous territory with the 2024 presidential election, on the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, the IRS is already the most hated agency in the U.S. And obviously, if they step up the heat on Americans, they're going to be hated even more.
You're going to see a Tea Party 3.0 or something like that. Yeah. Potentially. I just have one more, more abstract question for you. A friend of mine wanted me to ask you this. I know you don't talk too much about, you try to keep it strictly on finances and macroeconomics. But what do you think about human population as a bubble? Because if you look at, it almost looks like the stock market in 2020. If you look at human population on a graph, it reaches this inflection point, and it's like, do you think that we're in store for some sort of correction? I don't, that's, kind of a bit Malthusian thinking that, oh no, we just have too many people. Look, it's a big planet. I think, we got a lot of room. There's a lot of unoccupied land. I think part of the problem is, if you look at how the population is growing,
a lot of people that should be having more kids aren't. They're too busy working. They can't afford kids because they're working so hard to pay their high taxes. But then you got a lot of people that aren't working at all because they're living off the government, and they're having tons of kids because they're getting paid by the government to have kids. The more kids you have, the more money you get. And these children are not being raised in the right environment. They're not being raised with the right work ethic or the right morals. So I think that is a problem. Not so much that we have more people, but the character of the people that we are bringing into the world. That is the problem. We need the hardest working, the smartest to procreate the most. Those are the genes that we want into the future. Those are the parents that we want shaping the minds of future leaders. Because obviously the people who are working and don't have time to have kids, but they have careers, you got a husband and wife that are both working full-time jobs and they don't have time to have maybe more than one kid. They're generally smarter than the guy and gal who are just living on welfare.
Have you ever seen the movie Idiocracy?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the funniest part of that movie is just the beginning. The opening scene is hysterical. It kind of was a little bit of a letdown because that was so funny. I was looking for more of that, but that was hysterical, where that one guy is like, having sex with everybody, this jock, and and everybody's getting pregnant. And I'm going to have you and you and you and whatever. And then the couple is just, they never have time to have kids because they're too busy working or worried about the economy. And then so this average guy goes into the future and all of a sudden he's a genius.
Well, I think maybe that's why some people think that that there is going to be some Malthusian catastrophe at some point because, but perhaps the demographic, how it's unraveling right now is not ideal.
Yeah, but I think, I have faith in science and technology. Back when Mathos, or however you pronounce his name.
Malthus,
you remember?
Malthus, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but when he was, postulating that the world was going to run out of food, he was just looking at current population trends and then the current agriculture technology that existed and said, well, we can't feed all these people the way we grow food. But what he couldn't envision was the Industrial Revolution and the way farming would change. And so I believe that even if, we had 10 billion people or 20 billion people, we would figure out how to provide the resources that those people need. Capitalism, human ingenuity, we're going to become more efficient, we're going to become more productive, especially if the government gets out of the way, and allows the free market to work. I mean, if we're one giant socialist world, no, we're not going to accomplish anything. But the more freedom we have in the world, the more the world is going to accomplish. And who knows? Obviously, I mean, it's a big solar system. It's an even bigger galaxy. So, and the universe is even bigger than that. But I mean, forget about that. But I mean, I'm sure that over the centuries and over the millennia, if we run out of space here, we'll find some space someplace else. That will happen. I mean, not in our lifetimes, but it will happen in the lifetimes of whoever it becomes a problem for.
Yeah, it seems though that, that the government's attempts to intervene in the ongoing crises that we're seeing right now with respect to climate issues and other things like that, it's only going to make the problem worse. Like that they're going to actually, they're going to come in on the guise of, we got to do all this to save the environment, but they're going to actually make it worse because it's all about profit and, just like this whole, I don't know what your thoughts are on the World Economic Forum. I mean, I don't know much about it, but apparently it's a popular topic.
It's a complete waste of time. But that is the problem with government. They make every problem they try to solve worse. But what's even worse than that is that the problems they're trying to solve, generally they created. So government creates a problem. Like, look at what they're doing now. I was just listening to some politicians this morning talking about the student loan problem and all these student loans. They're trying to solve that problem. Well, the government created that problem. Students wouldn't have loans if it wasn't for the government student loan programs. colleges couldn't charge such high tuition if the government didn't loan all these money to the kids to bid up prices. The government created that problem. Before the government got involved in college, it wasn't that expensive. You didn't have to borrow money. My father grew up in a lower, middle, upper, lower class family. His father was a carpenter. He had 7 sisters. His father had no money. My grandfather had no money to send my dad to college. My dad didn't have any money, so he had a summer job waiting tables. That's all it took. He didn't borrow any money. He paid for tuition, room and board, got an accounting degree, and he just worked as a waiter over the summers. And most of his friends, there used to be an expression in America, I'm working my way through college. Okay, people work their way through college. Now they borrow their way through college. And when they graduate, they got a mountain of debt. Right? And now the government, oh my God, students have so much debt. We need a government solution. No, we don't. It's a government created problem. We need a free market solution. We got to get the government out of higher education. We got to get the government out of student loans, whether it guarantees them or makes them directly. There can't be any more money loaned to anybody to go to college. We need to force colleges and universities to cut prices. Why would they cut prices now? The kids got all this government money to pay whatever price they want to charge. Bring some free market forces into college. Can you imagine if everybody got government loans to buy cell phones, how expensive cell phones would be right now? Why are they so cheap? Because the capitalist system brought the price down. You don't get a government loan. So wherever the government is involved, same thing with healthcare. Why is healthcare so expensive? Because the government plays such a big role. So wherever you see high prices and or low quality, it's because of an excessive government involvement. And the only solution is to get government out so that free market forces can come in.
Do you think that the government plays any role in mitigating the various crises around the world? I mean, obviously, we need government for military, for some, basic.
Well, most of the time, the government is creating the crises. It's like they light a fire and they say, okay, see, now we'll put it out. We'll protect you from this fire that we lit. I do believe that government is a necessary evil, but the problem is sometimes, it becomes too big a burden that the negatives outweigh the positives. And that's pretty much the case. I mean, governments can add to the overall well-being and prosperity of a society if they stick to their limited mission of protecting individual liberty and private property. That's it. So if they can create an environment where I'm more likely to keep the fruits of my labor, then I'm going to labor harder and produce a bigger bounty of fruit from which everybody can benefit. That's the beauty of capitalism. I don't get rich unless I enrich other people in the process. But when the government gets so big that the harm that it does outweighs the benefit that it provides, well, then it's time to get rid of the government, right? That's what the founding fathers said, right? You have to dissolve the government when it becomes so bad. Unfortunately, we're way beyond that point. I mean, if you go back to the American Revolution and look at what King George was doing in England, what he was doing is nothing compared to what we're doing to ourselves. I mean, King George, in his wildest imagination, wouldn't have even conceived of the IRS. He wouldn't have conceived of an income tax. I mean, the founding fathers objected to a sales tax on tea. Can you imagine how much they would have objected to an income tax? What if the colonists had to go around keeping records of everything that they spent and all their deductions, and they had to come up with a tax return and send it over to King George? How long would that have lasted? I mean, there was only about a third of Americans that were in favor of the revolution. If King George had an income tax, everybody would have been in favor of the revolution. There would have been no holdouts. So, we've already gone way beyond what King George did. Any of the founding fathers were alive today, they would be leading the revolution to overthrow the government we have right now.
Yeah, and that's not even counting the surveillance apparatus that we have in place, which would probably have Orwell turning in his grave, I'm sure, at this point. I noticed yesterday, it's funny you say that, because I looked up, what the highest tax rates are for various countries around the world, and it's all the G7 countries that have the highest rates of taxation. I think China is pretty big on taxation too, but if we're such a prosperous lot of countries, you would think that
we wouldn't have
yeah,
to
and it's
have
actually
such exorbitant
deceptive.
taxation.
When you compare the U.S. tax rate to most other countries, if you live in most countries, your national tax rate is your tax rate. I mean, most cities don't impose another tax. So Americans, you may say, oh, we have a 37% tax rate in America. Well, if you live in Florida, what if you live in California? What if you live in New York? Now you're looking at the high 40s. And then what about the Obamacare, 3.9% tax? Throw that on. So there are a lot of Americans living in some high tax states that are north of 50% of their income in tax. Now that doesn't even count what they pay in property taxes or sales taxes or stuff like that. So when you compare the marginal income tax rate in America to Germany or France or Japan, you got to add in those local taxes, state and local taxes. Even New York City imposes its own city income tax on residents. So you live in New York City, you're paying federal tax, state tax, and city tax. And by the way, they can't deduct those taxes anymore. I mean, there's a $10,000 cap. It used to be unlimited, but that changed under Trump. So that made those taxes an even bigger burden because they're no longer deductible against your federal tax. You just add it right on top. So I think America is one of the highest taxed nations in the world on a marginal tax break. Now, we do have ways to avoid that, right? Like we have the carried interest. If you're a hedge fund manager or a private equity guy, you don't have to pay that top rate. You could pay capital gains rate. But most people aren't able to take advantage of that carried interest tax loophole, which was, by the way, preserved in the Inflation Reduction Act. They made sure to take care of the hedge fund and private equity billionaires. They didn't want to go after them, but they got 87,000 IRS agents to go after the middle class.
Yeah, it's just kind of paradoxical that we pride ourselves on being one of the freest societies on the planet. However, we're also at the same time one of the most heavily taxed and heavily regulated. So I can only imagine when this reality hits people how bad it's going to be.
Here's a key point. Even though we're one of the most heavily taxed, we're not taxed enough because we're running $2 to $3 trillion a year budget deficits. So that's how much higher taxes would have to be if the government was fiscally responsible. They would have to pretty much double our tax rates in order to collect all the money that they're spending. But the real measure of taxation is spending. Every dollar a government spends is a dollar the public is on the hook to pay. And so in reality, the way we're paying for these budget deficits is with inflation. So inflation is actually a tax. It's a tax on the public to provide for government spending. So you have to add all these big price increases to your income tax and your property tax to see how much you're paying in taxes. So if your grocery bill and your rent and your food bill, if you're paying an extra 10 grand a year, more than you were paying last year, that's just 10 grand in taxes. That's really all it is.
Yeah, that's so really what you're saying is the actual amount of money that we really do get from our labor is very minimal compared to the actual dollar figure that shows up there. So yeah, that's not good. I did actually want to ask you one more thing about employment rates, because we're hearing about the employment rate is so low, yet it seems like nobody can find anybody to work. So where are all the employees?
Yeah, I don't know. There is a big labor shortage. I mean, I see that, in my daily life with things that we're trying to get done, and people always blame it on I can't get any workers. I can't find anybody willing to show up. But the official unemployment rate, at least in the U.S., is very misleading because there are a lot of people that are not employed that are not counted because they're no longer in the labor force. Long-term unemployed, discouraged workers, people who are working part-time but want to work full-time but haven't been able to get a full-time job. So, it's deceptive. I mean, the real rate is much, much higher, just like the inflation rate. We don't measure inflation the way we used to, and we don't measure unemployment. If we still measured unemployment today the way we did, let's say, during the Great Depression, we would be well above 10%. How much higher, I don't know. So we do have a lot of people who are unemployed. But I also take issue with anyone who claims we have a strong labor market, not just based on that low unemployment rate, but based on all the jobs that we've been creating over the past year or so. Because if you look at who's been getting those jobs and what kind of jobs they are, pretty much all the jobs have gone from people who were already employed, especially over the last 4 months. So these are people who had a job getting a second job or a third job. You really have a explosion in moonlighting. In fact, as of last month, we now have a record number of Americans who are holding down 2 full-time jobs simultaneously. And if you look at wages are going up, but at less than half the rate that prices are going up. And of course, that's just the official rate. Unofficially, prices are rising 3 or 4 times faster than wages. So real wages are plunging. That's why the savings rate in America is the lowest since the Great Recession, 2008. That's why you have record credit card debt, because even with all these jobs, Americans still can't pay the bills without going into debt. But if we really had a strong labor market, which is what the politicians claim, why would you need 2 or 3 jobs? I mean, if we had a strong labor market, 1 job would cut it. Why would workers be accepting pay cuts, which is basically what they're doing? If your cost of living goes up 10%, but your boss only gives you a 5% raise, that's a 5% pay cut. In a strong labor market, you would be able to go to your boss and say, look, my cost of living is up 10%. I want a 15% raise or I'm out the door. I'm going to go take another job in this strong labor market. When you don't have the power to do that, when your boss could actually say, hey, costs are up 10%, I'm only going to give you a 5% wage, and you take it, you're in a weak labor market. You are stuck with that crappy job. And the only way you can get by is to get another crappy job. And that's what's happening. People are taking low-paying jobs on top of the low-paying jobs they have so that they can pay the rent, so that they can put food on the table. In fact, what if some of these jobs that are being created are people who used to be retired, but the cost of living went up so much that their retirement income can no longer pay the rent or, heat your apartment or put food on the table. So now a lot of people who are 70 years old, instead of playing golf, they're now, working at Walmart. You think they want to be at Walmart? No. You think they're glad that job was created? No, they didn't want that job. They need that crappy job. And so I wouldn't brag about forcing somebody who is retired to come out of retirement to take, a job at Walmart. So I don't think just because we're creating jobs means we have a strong labor market or a strong economy. I think a lot of these jobs are proof of how weak the economy is.
Well, that's very interesting that you mentioned that, because I think it's only a matter of time before we see another we are the 99%. Your first video that went viral, I have a feeling you're going to be out on the street again soon.
The first one was Peter Schiff was right. That one came out in 2009. I didn't do that one myself. Somebody else did, and it got, a couple million views early on. And that was in the early days of YouTube when 1 million views was very rare. Now, of course, you got so many views on YouTube that, but back then it was one of the most popular videos, because it was not many videos made it to 1 million views in 2009. And yeah, you can see a lot of my videos on my YouTube channel, including that one and a lot of other good videos that I've come up with at the Schiff Report. Also, I do my own podcast, the Peter Schiff Show, usually a couple a week, sometimes 3, sometimes 1, depending on what's going on and how much free time I have. But you can listen to my podcasts at schiffradio.com, and I also post them all to my YouTube channel.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to encourage people to go check that out. I know I tune into your podcast every other day or so. When the revolution does start, I guess we're going to have you back to get your analysis of the situation.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for having me on.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com. where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.